Okay, so we're back. I think my mic setup is pretty good again. It's behaving relatively okay, so that's nice. And we're back in this nice room. My stuff is going on. I think that what's going on now is ahead of us there's a pretty plain stretch where nothing too new should be going on, and I think that should be a good opportunity to just kind of reiterate the few key starting ideas I had, which might not have picked up too well when I was really bad with the audio. I know it's not great now, but sorry, I was just pausing the audio a moment there to clear my throat. Yes, I was just saying, I just want to reiterate a few key ideas now during a less eventful stretch that's coming up ahead, because I know I kind of covered a few key ideas with less than stellar audio, and that's kind of a failing on my part, but I'll just kind of, as you can see, this whole section I can just hold down the trigger and just power forward, and it's not going to be mind-blowingly interesting, so I can just take my time a bit and just, wasn't aware of that, but yeah, there's nothing too interesting there. It's just, we're just going to be moving forward a bit, and this is a good time to just talk about, again, just general stuff, general thoughts on doing things with games online. Okay, sorry, I'm just getting a bit caught up in speaking now, but I'm trying to power on, so you can see bullet holes and stuff. It's very cool, the effects we have going on in this game, but there's not going to be anything mind-blowing going on here. It's just kind of, what's the point of showing off a sequence like this on YouTube? There's really not that much in my opinion, so as I've said before, the value in this section is in the person who is presenting it basically, and yeah, so this is the me show until something interesting happens with the game again. So I was just thinking, like, think of how much stuff with Halo, how many people have played this level, this section of the game online, and ask most of those people just like, what is the point? Why did you do this? I think many would very much struggle to answer you, because it really is like, why do we put games on the internet? I think we know that, like, the main reason why most of us would is it's cool to be looked at, it's cool to have attention, you want to get famous, money, whatever. I admit I like that stuff, but, I actually have, I also want to appreciate Halo. I enjoy it, and I'm not just pissing around. I want to ideally help other people enjoy it too, and as I said before in that first video, again, not kidding, I think that Chris Chan was the greatest Let's Player ever, because through that stupidity, which kind of, alongside genius, creates the audacity necessary to look laterally at art and be shamelessly into what you are into, his approach was purely personal. When he makes a Animal Crossing documentary, it is not about Animal Crossing, it is about him. But, he is interesting because he is so shamelessly himself, and that is just fascinating to observe. A weird, shamelessly selfish person refracted through a piece of media. It's just neat to observe. Here's an alien, we'll just kill him. Sorry, dude, but yeah, so basically, this whole section, the game itself, you may have played it or you know it, there's nothing too interesting here. If there's going to be anything of interest, it will be the thing, just kind of a refracting thing through which you can get my thoughts on it. And so I'm just going to speak generally about games for a while. Here's the Marines doing their thing, they aren't just fighting guys, they're good props for setting up moments like this. Here's two more Marines. And they haven't had a good day. They're being invaded. Just a cool little moment here. It's like, again, it's like Half-Life, where the game does a very good job of using its different moving parts to set up cool moments. Like, there's really not much going on here that's actually, like, scripted, like a Call of Duty campaign. Like, they put aliens in there and tell them to run out. Those two guys there are scripted to explode, but then, just the way the parts are set up, it's all very kind of semi-autonomous. It's like a living virtual space, which they then set a game inside, By that I just mean, like, you can have the aliens and the Marines standing in a place and they will do interesting stuff just with their baseline instructions, and that's, I really think, the strength of the first Halo game in particular, that it really just kind of sets up the parts and then lets you make your own sense of them, and in the later ones they do drift a bit into the Call of Duty problem, where it's really more like kind of, it's not a virtual space, it's a kind of interactive, directed experience in which you are basically paying for not the privilege of access to interesting virtual space, you are paying for the right to play an actor role in this directorial imposed from above vision. So like, what I'm doing right now, am I really playing the role of the Master Chief? No, but the game doesn't resist that. I can do any number of things here. I can walk around in other directions. I can just spend hours bouncing around in this room. And nothing will happen, but you'll notice with a game like Call of Duty or something, like, the game will often just actually get uppity at you. It will get snippy. It will just freaking have some magic bullet from nowhere kill you if you go too far off script or something like that. Halo never does anything like that, which is largely the beauty of it. Again, I can play this like Mario 64 and do whatever I want, and I'll speak more about this in the next level where it more resembles other games which do this better and worse. We can talk more about the use of space, but here I just wanted to get that idea out there, that what I like is, again, that this thing is very... the parts are all very dynamic, and they just kind of do interesting things on their own. That's always been fascinating to me in video games. I never understood how that wasn't always the push, that basically, why wasn't Halo 2 just like massive? Yes, they're going to go do stuff they say, whatever. Anyway, my thinking was always, why isn't Halo just like constantly evolving towards being a bigger, dynamic, virtual world? Like, I don't really care about... I mean, I do care about the vision inside it. It's halfway interesting as pop science fiction, but, you know, that's not really the, like, really remarkable craft here. Why Halo, I think, is remarkable is as basically a virtual space which is serving as a setting for popular science fiction. What I'm actually into is this idea of basically, yes, again, it's the idea that they create the setting and they create the experience within it, and just how basically both of them work together really, really well and are at least somewhat appreciable in their own way. I really, really like that, if I have made any sense there. It's just a cool little situation. We've got Marines behind this barricade fighting these guys. Could give this a moment just to kind of show you how, what I mean by basically the parts kind of, they're set up to run under their own power. This actually isn't a great example because they shoot their own barricade. But then that's kind of deliberate, where basically the idea is these guys are here for show and you're meant to go around to fight the aliens, but so you can see the Marines, they don't just kind of stand in place like Call of Duty soldiers, where they just kind of stand in place and shoot and they have no weight to them or anything. It's very... These guys do the moves I do. That jump they do is actually like a purpose-oriented thing. Once grenades come into the game, you'll see they have... Everything feels like it has a very weighted presence in the game world, and that makes more sense if you play Myth, their older game. Another thing I want to talk about down the line. Sorry, let me just deal with that. Bungie made before this an RTS game. RTS, I really hate genre terminology, that's another subject, but they made a strategy game, you know, like you're a presence in the clouds and you give instructions to soldiers on the ground. And that game was actually made in an engine very much like Halo's, like it might have even been... Halo was just like a rebuilding of the Myth engine, and why I bring that up is that Myth's kind of gimmick was that physical objects had actual, like, physical presence. It was a very, like, attempt at a high-fidelity realization of simulation of 3D space. Like, objects actually fly through the air, and it's not like a dice roll, like, that physical object will hit what it is aimed at or it will miss. And there's much more of that in here. You can see that, like, the Marines dive around to dodge bullets, projectiles fly through the air, and grenades especially. One friend who didn't like this game too much told me that he believed it had the best grenades he had ever seen in a video game, and that's definitely the Myth thing. That's just the extreme attention Bungie have to objects in 3D space, which is, again, tying into why I love this game, this idea that, you know, we are playing a virtual world right now, we are not playing a directed vision. I mean, the world exists in service of that vision, but I can ignore it and still have a good time, whereas I would really say that, like, in Call of Duty Modern Warfare, I cannot do that. It's basically, you know, again, it's the play, and the director has a role for me, and It's fun, but only as long as you and the director are on the same page, and if you try to basically make your own fun, you will fall short very, very quickly. You will just immediately see how bound you are to the intentions of the creators. And Bungie, they had more intentions with their work than most people. This is actually something you can take quite seriously as pop science fiction. But at the same time, they really took seriously the idea that it should be fun for its own sake. I really think that they basically did the best you can possibly do on both sides. I can take this completely seriously and try to basically play in line with their vision, or I can just, treat it like a virtual playground and do whatever the hell I want, and I will have a good time either way. And that's really something that I think is lacking even just already by Halo 2. There are far fewer big open dynamic scenarios that I just want to play over and over and over again, and I think that's really a great shame. I think that that's something video games lost, and again, I'll talk about it in the next level when things actually open up, but what I want to talk about is the significance of Grand Theft Auto to video games in the 2000s, and this idea of basically how the decline of Rockstar, I believe, is very much this issue of virtual space as opposed to directed vision, and them just basically not being good at catering to both at the same time. They were at one point, but how they've turned out now has made me believe that that is actually incidental, and they didn't understand how good they made the game, basically. That gets thrown at great artists a lot, that charge, you don't understand what made it good. Most of the time I think it's wrong, but with Rockstar, I'll talk about it, I really do believe that they actually have no idea how their own games took off. I'll talk about it later. I want to actually get more general again here and just kind of power through the sequence and work through to some more interesting things to observe. Again, they're just a cool situation, Marines fighting them, and we cut through and sort the situation. Lots of cool stuff going on here. Just watch these guys, they actually, again, they do interesting stuff, I love watching them. There's lots of weight to their movements, they react to lots of things, they talk. Just, again, very animated, like, if you're like me, you'll stop and watch, like, the soldiers in a Call of Duty game, and I think it's very disappointing how that tends to play out. They just don't do as much as these guys, basically. It's not a technology question, like what do we have the power to do in games. It's just like they don't care, they don't really, it doesn't occur to them to think like, okay, make a thing that's just inherently cool and then, build your vision into that. Like, no, a Call of Duty soldier, if he's on your side, he's just like a prop in driving forward the director's vision, and it would never occur to them like, why wouldn't the player be shooting at this point, But Bungie, they basically designed this like a strategy game first, in the sense of like, the interest is in just like watching rather than participating, so the Marines just have a lot more interesting behavior than they would in, a game made as a pure FPS. I hate genre terminology because I think it basically makes people bad at reading what's in front of them. And that's another thing I wanted to talk about, how strategy games basically fell apart and died, and what I believe basically happened there was the strategy game is basically, again, it's a virtual space, and that's what most people enjoyed it as. And how strategy games fell apart is basically that the people who like playing with virtual space were shamed by the actual game people who enjoy contrived challenges as a bunch of shitters and cowards, basically, and so all of the cool, fun to look at moving parts were phased out in favor of, well-balanced chess, whatever, like turning the games into sports for people who don't go outside, and that's basically just way less interesting to most people. And so people say, like, why did RTS die? Well, it died because of the term RTS, because we were conflating completely different fields of experience, and what I mean by that is basically people call Dawn of War 1, a very beloved RTS game, they call it an RTS, but, that suggests it's of a kind with, like, StarCraft 2, when, they are really not kindred experiences at all. Dawn of War 1 is still beloved, but nobody plays it like StarCraft. The way that you play it is basically a living diorama, it's a virtual space that you just want to be in, you want to observe. People just like to, basically make little interactive war movies with it. The idea is like, the appeal is that it is a toy box which is alive, and there is nothing wrong with that. It's actually quite awesome. It's something, video games, if we want to call them that, can do quite remarkably, and you'll see that, like, it's even the level I appreciate Halo on, again, made as an RTS first, I'll talk about that later, that yes, like, it's made to just unfold in cool ways in front of you, and that's what I'm interested in. Halo, again, had a similar thing where FPS, like, the people who like it as games were able to phase out the people like me who like it as virtual space and interesting perspective on like novel virtual experience. And so, the new Halos, because they don't understand what they're doing, again, they make something called a campaign and they don't really understand what it's meant to do. And then they think like, okay, what we're actually doing, our real job is multiplayer, which is just, like basically tag for people who don't want to stand up. You just run around in circles shooting people in the back. This, what I'm doing right now, the Halo Combat Evolved Virtual Space and Halo Infinite Multiplayer, they are called experiences of the same kind, the FPS experience, but does it really make sense to call these the same thing? Again, I just think you really need to think laterally to understand video games. Like, really, this is a multimedia thing, not a game that I'm enjoying right now, and basically video games went completely to hell because people just, again, it's largely a language problem that we can't describe the experiences which we enjoy, so we lost them to other people who were using equally poor language but were more insistent. I'm sorry, I said I would power forward a fair bit, but I have basically gotten this far and then started monologuing again. I think I will cut it here and then resolve to move forward with more determination in the next one. So, yeah, I hope you enjoyed this, found it halfway interesting. I hope that I got my volume balance a bit better, and I'll see you again shortly. I'm just going to cut this here.